Jordan. Welcome to the Mindset Queen podcast. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing so good. Today was a very long day. It was interesting to say the least, but I'm excited and I'm honored.
Yes, even with recording this podcast, guys, we have been through so much trying to get this going. A lot of our recording systems were not picking up and they weren't working. So I really think this is a message that people need to hear because otherwise, like, why would all this happen, right? But like, we pushed through it. So, Jordan, thank you for bearing with me.
And thank you for bearing with me too, because it was really my fault. The reason why I don't know, it just wasn't working on my end today.
No, it's fine. I'm just glad that we have everything intact and we're focusing in on our faith series taken from Hebrews 11. And basically guys, I really wanted Jordan to come in because he talks a lot about a multitude of topics, but I love listening to his relationship messages because I feel like they are so powerful and he helps so many people, on his Instagram platform at J Ellis Green. And basically, I wanted him to share like how we can have more faith in relationships. I think that's one of the areas that a lot of people nowadays are almost like, they feel like, man, I just give up, like I don't want to try again, especially if dated, even if you dated and courted God's way, people still experience hiccups in their faith. And I wanted Jordan to come on and encourage us and just show us that, like, we can still have faith and know that our relationships and marriages can really work.
Yeah, absolutely. What's so interesting about this whole faith topic is I'm also a minister as well, minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I preached yesterday about this specific topic of faith. What we don't recognize or don't like to really acknowledge is that faith is tied to obedience. So when you
Mm.
recognize that faith and obedience are literally one and the same, if you look at any of the examples that we see in the scriptures, especially Abram, who later was recognized as Abraham, God gave him a promise, but after he gave him promise, he told him what was going to happen, but then he gave him instructions. He said, I'm going to do this if you do this, right? So if
Mhm.
God has promised you, number one, that's his plan for your life, right? So a lot of times we get caught up in not knowing what God wants for us, but he's promised these things to us, right? Like he's promised to give us the desires of our heart according to his riches and glory. So if you believe that he's going to, allow you, grace you to be called to the marriage ministry, right? That's a promise. But, you know, wow, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm writing a
No,
book. I'm
it's
writing.
okay because we talked about Abraham and Sarah in our faith
Wow,
series.
that's awesome.
So, yes, yes, please go on. I want to
Sure.
hear
No,
it.
absolutely. I wanted to say that I'm writing a book, and it's for those who have a vision for their life, right? Any visionary as it pertains to relationships, business, entrepreneurship, politics, education, whatever. Whenever you have a vision, the beginning always starts with the end, right? What I mean by that is that the beginning of you seeing the vision, you see what the end result is going to be. You see yourself walking down the aisle. You see yourself walking across the stage. You see yourself writing the $1 million check, whatever it may be. You see it before it actually happens. You see it before you see it.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying? So that's God's promise to you. That's God's plan for you, right? That is when God visits Abraham and says, I'm going to make you a great nation. That's your encounter with God. It's not coincidence. You see what I'm saying? So once you have that moment, you have to recognize that God is showing you that because he wants you to be obedient and faithful. That's why we have the term faithful. He wants you to be faithful over what he's shown you, right? And then you have to do what God says. So we don't like to obey in that sense. I mean, we're naturally rebels, man. We want to do what we want to do. I'm guilty
Right.
of it as well. You know what I mean? Like I'm guilty of it as well. If God, I mean, God has a plan and he has a way that he wants you to accomplish that plan, right? And you got to just do what he says. Now, that's not to say that if you don't do everything to a T that it won't happen for you. Obviously, that's not true because God is rich in mercy, right? But you want to give it your best shot. You know what I mean? Like you want to give it a valiant effort. You want to show God that you're going to be faithful over what he's trusted you with. because you can clearly see that relationships divorce rate for marriage is at an all-time high. I personally know couples
Mhm.
who were, dating for years and got married and divorced in 6 months. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it's a very, very important thing to consider, man. When you are going or approaching or attempting desiring to be married, you got to know that it's a calling. You got to know that he's not just calling you to be married so that you can have a good life, but he's calling you to be a light to other people. He's calling you to be like Abraham, in the sense that he'll be blessed and the nations of the world will be blessed because of his obedience. It's really deep. I'm sorry. We could talk for days about that one.
No, like that is so true though. And I love the fact that you acknowledge that it's a calling. And for me, like I've had that calling
Yeah,
on my life to be a wife and a mom
absolutely.
for years, even as a teenager. And you and I, we grew up in church, so we were able to learn from, past, well, of course, your father and
Mhm.
mother,
Right.
y'all, they're your leaders in the congregation. But we both basically like learned like, okay, this is how you become a good husband, this is how
Yeah.
you become a good wife
Right.
from the biblical perspective.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, a lot of people did not grow up in church,
Yeah.
or if they did grow up in church, every church is not the same,
Absolutely.
so
I
they
was just
may
about
not
to
have
say,
focused on that.
yeah, I was just about to say that sometimes the examples that we see in the church are the worst ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's so
Yes.
funny. I have to say this because my parents have been married for 26 years.
Yay.
They have been doing ministry for some time now. I want to say like 18 years. And I know for a fact that they are called to help build families. Um, and if you
Mm.
look at the first example of in the Bible of what a family is, it was marriage, right? Like it was marriage between man and wife, man and woman. You know what I mean? So it's like it's literally the foundation of how we will create healthy generations to come. It's God's plan. It's His structure. He wants the man and the woman to be in place so that everything can flow out of that. Um, yeah, it's a really, really deep topic. Like you said, we sometimes see those examples that aren't so good, right? So then
Mm-hmm.
it kind of taints our image of what marriage is supposed to be and or not supposed to be. But those two people who are coming together as one, man, you gotta just be determined to not be like those poor examples. My wife and
Yes.
I, we sat down before we even got married, long before we got married, and we exposed to each other the things that we had seen in other relationships or other marriages in our lives, right? Not necessarily with our immediate family members, but just in general, things that we
Yeah.
saw and that we didn't think would be best for our marriage. Like we have a vision for our marriage. You know what I mean? Like we have a destination in which we want to go to by God's grace. Um, but with a church, man, it's just like it's like it can be a hit or miss sometimes. Which is the reason why
Mm-hmm.
we need to use the Lord as foundation, and seek wise counsel. That's really, really important because everybody's got something to say, but not everything is worth listening to. You know what I mean? So seeking wise
Yes,
counsel.
that is so true. Oh my gosh, there's
Yeah,
so many gems that you're dropping here, and I think that it's just so important, for everyone to catch those. And if you don't mind, would you tell us about your platform,
sure.
how you are reaching your audience, and like what your message is to the world?
Absolutely. So just in general, I just know that I'm a servant to mankind to share the love of Jesus Christ, not only just through speaking, but in everyday life, how I treat people. I always try to shine my light, the one that Jesus has put inside of me. My
Mm-hmm.
platforms primarily are through social media. My Instagram page is J Green Ellis Live. It's the letter J, the color green, ELLISLIVE. I do a daily motivational post called 1 Minute Message, where I literally pack a message into 1 minute. And it's tough for me because I'm really long winded and I'll pick different topics. I'll pick
And I
different.
know this. I know you're long
I
winded,
am.
but you're perfect for this, though.
Yeah, so it's a challenge for me. So that's like good for me to kind of condense something that's impactful into a minute. And I pick different topics, whatever the Lord lays on my heart. a lot of them lately have been relationship based. And I've been getting a lot of feedback. I think that my most popular videos are the ones that are specifically on relationships. I give practical tips. I'm really big on practicality because
Yeah.
especially in the church, we get so heavenly minded that we're no earthly good, and it's just like, okay,
Mm.
I understand that I'm supposed to trust God, but what does that physically look like? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like what does faith look like? What does it mean? What does it mean to look like you have faith? Like, what am I practically supposed to do? So in that, I also have live events that I host. I hosted a conference, my first annual conference called the Unashamed Conference this past year. We
Oh,
had
nice.
Yeah, it was an awesome time. We had different workshops covering various topics, one being relationships, where I had my parents, my spiritual parents as well, Bishop Charles Ellis and Pastor Roslyn Ellis, come in and talk about their journey into becoming one. I also had another one of my spiritual mentors, uh, Reverend Queen, who's from the First Baptist Church of Glenarda, and his lovely wife. They came and shared. I had one of my good friends who is a pretty well-known entrepreneur whose name is Dana Chanel. She hosts the Sprinkle of Jesus app. Her and her husband came down and
Nice.
talked
Oh my
about.
gosh, I have that app.
Yeah. Dana and I connected when I first started Unashamed. And we've kind of just like worked together here and there since then. But she and her husband came down. It was dope. We had Benita Jones come down and do a concert, and she did a worship class. I'm also a musician as well, so it was awesome. I said that to say that I host my own events, but then I also go to speak wherever I'm called to, whether it be in the church or in the schools. I love to motivate the youth. I love to give them practical steps, because they literally are going to be what controls our future, man. So I just feel that I'm called to inspire them and give them practical tools while physically showing them what the love of Christ looks like.
Absolutely. And I love that. I love that you work with high school students and even undergraduate college students.
Yeah,
And can you talk about that a little bit with
sure.
YouTube and how that works and how that's helping
Oh
them?
yeah, I definitely have recently taken the advantage of what we have as social media, man. You don't need any permission to do it. So like I said, I know when God speaks to me and there are things that need to be said, whether it be to, a small group or to the masses. So I've recently started a YouTube series called Hope for the Future, and that's specifically geared to middle and high school students all across the country, man, even international. I'm giving them practical steps in order to be successful, not just successful students, rather, but successful people. I think that we confuse the two in thinking that, students or young people are different than adults. It's like, no. When I was working in education as a student life counselor and even as a teacher, I found that this was even more of a passion for me, helping to mold the next generation. I always tell them, man, like, hey, listen, you got to deal with these things now so it becomes second nature to you when you get what you want. You know what I mean? A lot of times
Mm,
when we when we things get exposed when we get to a certain level, when we get to a certain platform, where it's like if somebody would have just checked you when you were 12 years old and they saw that anger issue, or if
right.
somebody would have just checked you when you were in high school running around not being focused, going to practice before you did your homework, all those little types of things. So those are the types of things that I like to address on the Hope for the Future show, and I really feel that it can be impactful, that it will be impactful, and that it'll touch the hearts of many. So I do a weekly post. It's a little bit longer than the 1 minute message, but not too long. It's about 3 to 5 minutes every episode, and my 1 minute messages every single day. I do a lot in my stories as well, and then my wife and I, we have a series that we're bringing back, a YouTube series that we're bringing back in February of 2020, called "Love Does Cost a Thing." Um,
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
I'm excited
So
for
this is
this.
this is the first actual like time me saying the first instance where I'm saying this in public. So we did a couple of like preliminary episodes when we first got married. But the truth is that we had to figure some things out before we started to, really dive in and help people build their relationship, build their marriages. Literally, like it's going to be a lot of spirituality in there. We love the Bible. That's how we live our lives. But
Right.
there's going to be a lot of practicality in it as well. Like one of our episodes is going to be strictly on what we did to prepare for our wedding. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So it's
Wow.
it's going to be awesome. So that's going to drop. We're going to try to do it around. We're going to do the first episode around Valentine's Day. So Be on the lookout for that.
That is awesome. And I cannot wait to tune in. And guys, what I'm going to do, I'm going to link all of Jordan's information down below so that you guys can be sure to connect with him. He has so many good things going on. And like, I don't want you just to hear him on this podcast and never like hear about him again. Like,
Absolutely.
no, like connect with him, go in those show notes. And that way you can just keep growing with him because he's clearly like expanding, exponentially. And it's going to happen so fast. And I don't want you to be late on the train.
If you blink, you'll
Um,
miss it.
yes, exactly. So I want to know a little bit about your knowledge in the area of relationships because you and I are both young. I think,
Yeah.
wait, you're 26, right?
I'm actually turning 26 in like 4 or 5 days.
Oh
So,
my gosh,
yeah.
happy early
Thank
birthday.
you. Thank you. On Saturday, October the 5th.
Yay! Well, you know what? I have another friend whose birthday is on the same day. So,
That's
and
awesome.
I'm 1 year older than you.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. So we're both young. Like we're super young, but like you clearly have some type of expertise in this area. It's working for you. I mean, you got a beautiful
I
wife
do. I
and
do. I'm blessed. I'm a
you're
blessed
very
man.
blessed. Yes. So I want to know like what made you kind of get into talking about relationships
Absolutely.
and what is that like for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's just really kind of the example that I always seen with my parents. Not that they're, I think that they have, first of all, like the greatest example of a relationship is, for me, I've literally seen the example modeled in front of myself the entire, like my entire life. And I say
Mhm.
this not to brag, but I just say it to give an example of my parents' character and relationship. I have never one time in my entire life seen my parents argue. And now
Wow.
that's not to say I would be a fool to say that they've never had a disagreement or argument,
Right.
right? But we never saw it. You know what I mean? Like my
Mhm.
brother and I, we never saw it. So whatever they had to handle, I don't think that it's a matter of them not being transparent or being fake as some people may think, but whatever they handled it in a way in which we were protected. You know what I'm saying? Like where we didn't necessarily have to see those things. I saw also my parents' passion to help people, and it just kind of like fell on me. You know how they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree,
Yes.
and it literally just fell on me. And then I also started to see, um, number one, how important relationships are, romantic and platonic. And I saw how people weren't really being successful. You know what I mean? Like they weren't experiencing what they deserve. You know what I'm saying? Like I have a
Mm.
I have a group of young ladies who I call my daughters, and you know they don't listen all the time, but and I just tell them you don't have to do these things. You know what I mean? Like there's going
Mhm.
to be somebody who's going to treat you the way that you are supposed to be and the way that you need to be, right? Like
Yes.
here's another little nugget, right? There's a guy named Dr. Gary Chapman who
I
coined
love him.
I was about to say he coined the 5 love languages, right? Everybody talks about it, but what we don't recognize is that this test or these series of tests is telling you not necessarily what your partner lacks, but how they need to be loved. Like everybody's not the same.
Mhm.
They need to be loved a certain way. And I tell my daughters, I'm like, yo, listen, somebody's gonna love you the way that you need to be loved. Like you don't have to settle. So I saw that there was like a void that wasn't being filled in my generation, man. And I just, my wife and I, we're really big servants. We're really big advocates for people, and we desire to help. I mean, people have helped to lead and guide us along the way, not just with examples, but wise counsel. So we desire to do that same thing for people, man. And here's another misconception that it's you supposed to be like old and decrepit when you find who you're supposed to be with. Absolutely not. You know what I mean? Yeah, you
No.
don't have to. You don't have to. You don't have to. You know, be nervous and scared, man. Once you know, I promise you, you'll know. Like, yeah, it's just a matter of kind of pulling the trigger. But I like I said, I saw the example of what I believe a biblical marriage is supposed to be. My
Mhm.
father loved my loves my mother just like how Christ loved the church. My
Yes.
mother is the epitome of slow to anger, of giving grace, not just to obviously her husband, but to her children as well. She nurtured us, she corrected us. It was the whole entire gambit, man. And because I saw it, I recognize that some other people didn't see it. So I want to kind of give them a glimpse of what I saw my entire life.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
just creating that mindset of possibilities.
absolutely.
So on
A
the
lot of
flip
people, I'm sorry,
side,
a lot of people think that it can't happen. Like, why do you think it can't be you? What you think it can be
mm,
everybody else, but not you? That's an oxymoron. You gotta believe first, and it can be you. I'll tell you this quick story. My parents, right? My parents grew up within a mile of each other, and they
mm,
never met one time until they were in their. My mother was in her late 30s, and my father was in his 40s.
wow, are you
I
serious?
promise you, I promise you. And it gets even deeper. One of my father's brothers and my mother were in the same class in the 7th grade, and they never met each other.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that goes in. Here's another topic that we'll probably talk a little bit about later. Is that you have to be willing to wait. You have
Yes,
to be willing to wait. Um,
yes. I
yeah.
want to speak to those two things. So,
Sure.
one, like you grew up in a household that was um stable,
Yes.
cultivated,
Yes.
all of those things. I'm on the opposite end of that spectrum.
Mhm.
Now, my mother and father, they were, married, but they grew up dirt poor,
Mhm.
mentality from, um I'll just say, my ancestors, because my grandmother, she just passed away the end of last
Wow.
year.
Sorry to hear that.
So, thank you. Yeah, so it's like totally different where there was abuse in relationships, there
Mhm.
was like poverty, all those different types of negative things, but my mom and dad, they decided to try to do things differently. Now, don't
Absolutely.
get me wrong, they weren't perfect, right? No
Right.
parents are, but they did try to pave the way. And so now for me, like, okay, you know what? I and my father did pass away when I was 9,
Wow.
so there were a lot of things that I didn't get,
Mhm.
right? And now as an adult, I'm like figuring out a lot of generational habits and
Mhm.
like blessings and curses,
Yes.
and I'm navigating through those and I'm breaking through a lot of things. But to hear you talk about how your parents literally didn't get married until they were in their 30s and 40s,
Yeah.
it makes me feel like, okay, this feels good. And that was in the 90s. Like,
Yep.
you didn't get married in the like when you were 30s and
Not at
40s
all.
in the 90s.
Or
You
have
typically,
kids.
exactly, like that was just almost unheard of.
Absolutely.
So to hear that, that's what they did, it gives me hope. Like, I'm so happy to hear this because in my own journey, I do have a desire to become married and to become a wife. So thank you for sharing all of that. Like, that
Absolutely.
has inspired me just through listening.
I'm so glad that it did, man. And that's the reason why um I do what I do, and my wife and I do what we do. We want to make this thing real for people, man. Like, it can be you. You don't have to
Yes.
settle for anything less than what you believe you deserve. Um, I think that sometimes our perception of things can change, but it won't be less. It won't be. It won't
Mm-hmm.
be what it's. It won't be. It'll be what it's supposed to be. So you'll be fulfilled. You won't be lacking in anything.
Exactly. And I love that you say that because what happens for a lot of people, so I've had conversations with people who've been married two, three, four, 5 times.
Mhm.
Okay. And the common thing that they say is that they were impatient
Mhm.
and that they weren't mature,
Yeah.
but they continue to get married. Okay, it's not always the other person.
Not at all.
Sometimes it's you
Yeah.
that you have to work on. And for me personally, I would rather have to wait and work on myself than give myself heartbreak after heartbreak
Absolutely.
from a marriage because I rushed ahead of God. Can
Mhm.
you speak on that for a little bit?
Yeah. I think that impulsiveness is a menace to our society in every single facet of that you can imagine, but especially with relationships, man. There's so many things that I could say on this, so I'm just gonna try to like give it a quick little jab.
Yeah.
I think that It's the Apostle James who writes, "Let patience have its perfect work in you." Right. So when you think about that scripture, I want you to imagine there being like a silhouette of a man, like the entire body. When you are going through different tests and trials, specifically as it pertains to relationships, there are, imagine it as pieces missing. And the only way to fit that piece into the puzzle is to go through, right? Is to learn from the test and trial, is to endure the test and trial, right? We have this misconception that when we believe, right, that God is going to fulfill this thing, that we're supposed to make it happen.
Mm.
You know what I mean? I mentioned this in my sermon yesterday. Abraham got the promise from God, but immediately after he faced a problem. The promise was he's going to have he's going to be the father of a great nation. All the nations of the earth will be blessed because of you. But Abraham didn't have a son, right? Abraham didn't have a
Yeah.
son, and he literally said to God, he said, God, well, I don't have a seed, so I'm just going to give this to one of my servants, my number one servant. I'm going to give it to him. And God was like, certainly not. Your seed is going to be the recipient of this blessing. It's going to be the one to carry on your name. And then even still, Abraham tried to force his own hand in the situation with having a son with his handmaiden. And God said, even still, it's not that, like, it's not going to be this son. I'm going to do this. It's not
Right.
our responsibility to make it happen. We can't make it happen. We're not strong enough. We don't have that power and control. But our responsibility is to be obedient to what God has called us to, no matter how long it takes, no matter what the situation looks like. Regardless if you're 100 years old and your wife is barren, regardless if you have every single thing that you need, but you're missing this one thing, you can't make it happen, because if you did it, then it's not God, right? Imagine
Mm.
this, right? God Abraham was an extremely wealthy man before God called him. When he calls him, he gives him the promise. He says, I'm going to do this and I'm going to make your name great. If Abraham had already had all these things, he was already a substantial man. He had the cattle, he had the goats, he had the currency, he had the wife, all those things. But to God, he still wasn't great. Do you see what I'm saying? He
Yeah.
still wasn't great. He was good, but he wasn't great. So even in your trying to do or manifest, even in your trying to manifest what God has promised you, it'll never be great. You know what I'm saying? Like, it'll never be what God intends for it to be. You just have to be
If you don't
obedient.
allow him to do it.
Exactly. Exactly. You have
Mm.
to allow God to do it, because God says that he can do exceedingly and abundantly above what we can ask, think, or even imagine. That's Ephesians 3:20. You can't even conceive the thought of what God is trying to do in your marriage. Like,
Wow.
I need you to really, like, hone in on that thing. Do you realize that you can't eat, like, God's thoughts are so far above what we think and what we can conceive? Where do you think you got that creative idea from? It has to be from a greater
Mm.
source. You see what I'm saying? So, like, I want us to really understand, man, that it's not our responsibility to make it happen. We just got to be obedient to what God has called us to. And a lot of times, most of the 99% of the time, obedience is going to require your patience and sacrifice. As a matter of fact, when Abram got that promise, right, he was told to make a sacrifice. It was something that was substantial to him, right? And then he had to protect the sacrifice. I believe that some of you guys that are listening to this right now, it's at least 3 or 4 of you, that your sacrifice is going to be your patience. You have to
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice your patience in order to have what God has promised to you. He's not a man that he would lie. If he's promised it to you, it's going to happen if you are obedient. I'm done preaching. I'm just saying that you
No,
guys
you're
have to.
preaching to me. Like I know you said them three, four people.
Yeah.
No, you talking to me. I literally have tears in my eyes
Wow.
because I feel like that is for me. Like I've always known that I was gonna get married
Yeah.
later in life,
Mm-hmm.
but I never knew when.
Yeah.
And it's just like dating and relationships is
Yeah.
frustrating for me.
Yeah.
If you look at my platforms, if you look at the things that I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
it of course, guys try to talk to me all the time, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just like they're not it. You're
Absolutely.
not it. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not that I'm being, because some people say, oh, you're too picky. No, this is my life. I
Absolutely.
know what God has called me to. I know that I'm going to change, and I already have. broken so many
Wow.
generational
Yeah.
curses, and I like that marriage is going to change everything for my descendants.
Yeah.
I know this. So
Yeah.
I have to be patient and I have to wait. I might have to wait longer than someone else,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that the promise isn't coming.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm just getting reminded of all these scriptures right now. I think it's the Apostle Peter who writes that, he says, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day. He
Wow.
says that
Yeah.
that it's a good thing for God's promise to be delayed because it gives us time to get ready. It gives us time to prepare for what God has promised to us. If God does not fulfill his promise, right? We're talking about the God of the Bible. If he does not fulfill his promise, then he's not God. Henceforth,
Mhm.
he's not worth worshiping. He's not worth giving your life to. He's not worth trusting in. And that's not the God that we serve. That's just the bottom
Right.
line. Not only the Bible proves it, but history proves it to be true. I'm really a stickler for that as well. Because I mean, even though I grew up in church, the church wasn't always in me. I actually despised church for a long time, because I saw how some people treated my parents as pastors, who truly and genuinely cared and took care, literally taking people in like the whole 9 yards. So I hated church for a long time. But then I met Jesus, like the real Jesus of the Bible.
Yeah.
Like in 2015 in Memphis, Tennessee, I literally met Jesus for the first time.
Are
Um,
you
I
serious? That
promise you.
happened then?
I promise you. I promise you. I promise
Oh
you.
my God, that is so crazy. And so when I introduced you on the
Uh
podcast, I
huh.
told everyone like how we met through Teach for
Uh huh.
America. Can you share that experience
Sure.
and what it was like for you?
Absolutely. So I don't know if you know this, but in that entire teacher institute, I was the only teacher who didn't have a roommate.
Oh yeah,
Right.
that's right. You didn't.
Right. So I was literally 14 hours away from my home. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm literally 14 hours away from my home. I didn't know anybody, didn't have any family, and I'm literally stuck by myself. I had encounters
Wow.
with skeptics, and I just believed in Jesus, but I didn't know how to like really to defend the faith, which we are called to as believers. First Peter 3:15 says that we should stand ready to give an account for what we believe. And I just couldn't do that. I just believed, and then I just had this zeal to dive deeply into the Word. God changed my heart towards people. God began to show me things that the truth of the Bible, that proves itself through history as well. Those were my moments. That's actually one of the reasons why I decided to come back home, because um, I had always felt this unction that I wasn't supposed to be there, but I ignored it and it never went away. So
Mm.
so I recognized what the Holy Spirit was and how the Holy Spirit spoke to me, or one way that the Holy Spirit spoke to me at that time. And I don't know if you know, but I was fasting for like three of the however many weeks that we were there. Um, and that unction, that urge never changed. So that was one of the reasons why that was the reason why I left, along with some other things. But
Yeah.
yeah, like I despised church, but then I met Jesus in 2015. He revealed himself to me, through the knowledge that we can read in the Word, and then also through a personal relationship, as through the Holy Spirit, which is promised to us to comfort us. I was okay, but I was comfortless at times. I was skeptical as to what was going to happen after the institute had happened, or I had finished. And I mean, he just revealed himself to me, and I haven't turned back since. If I would have stayed in Memphis, I'm not sure if I would be married. If I would have stayed in Memphis, I'm not sure if I would have started Unashamed Apparel. I'm not sure if I would even be talking to you right now,
I feel
because
the same way because I didn't fit like I did a year of
hmm
institute and then I was engaged and so that was one of my reasons, but there were other reasons because I wanted to be closer to home too.
yeah,
But I wouldn't be talking to you
yeah,
on this platform. I never would have really taken my businesses seriously,
yeah,
had I not came home. So I don't feel ashamed about going home. Like I went
yeah,
home to my mama. Like
yeah.
I have no shame in that.
Absolutely.
But because I went home, it was my foundation, it was my grounding, it was my building.
Yeah.
And because of that, I am where I am today. And I don't regret it one
Absolutely not.
bit.
Yeah. And you know what? And you know what? When we hear God, or when we think we hear God, the situation still has to prove itself to be God, right? So in these instances where we see in retrospect, it's like, okay, yeah, this really was God, and I'm so glad that I obeyed that unction and that I obeyed that urge. Because, like I said, man, nothing would have been the same. I needed to be home. Like, I
Mhm.
needed to be home. And the truth is like, I really loved Memphis. I still do. But all the people who I was connected with, I'm still connected with. You know what I'm saying? We don't talk often, but we talk from time to time, and nothing has changed, man. So, I'm grateful for the experience for sure. But I know, and I knew then where I was supposed to be.
Right, right. And I think that's also a part of faith too, because,
Absolutely.
in the opposite direction of that, Abraham was told to leave from his father Terah
Yep.
and go into another land.
Yep.
So,
A
it
land
works
a
both
land that he
ways.
didn't know or was unfamiliar with. It says a land that I will show you. It didn't say go to Memphis, Tennessee, or Picayune,
Right.
Mississippi, or Baltimore, Maryland. He said go to a land that I'll show you.
Yes. And look, the fact that you can say my hometown, that makes me really
I
happy because
listen.
most people can't.
I distinctly remember you telling everybody that you're from Picayune, Mississippi. I remember. I remember. I'll never forget it.
Yes, yes. So, guys, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, Jordan is going to tell us preparation things that we can do to get married, and how to have that faith for it. And then he's going to be talking about what we should be looking for in our partners, how to have those healthy relationships, and a whole lot more. So, stay tuned, and we're going to keep going on this faith train in relationships. So we are back with Jordan Green-Ellis, and we're talking all about faith and relationships. So Jordan is going to actually give us some practical advice. I mean, he's already done that, but he's going to give us some more practical advice as to, specifically, I want to know, like, what can we do to prepare to be married as an act of faith?
That's awesome. Yeah. So it's kind of like what I was. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I think that we really need to understand that faith is directly tied to obedience, right? So now, some people about to be mad at me for what I'm about to say, but if God tells you to abstain, right,
Hmm.
before you're married, then he's telling you to abstain, right? So
Yeah.
I know you've had an experience before, and I know you know what it's like, and I know that you think that this is the most daunting task, and I can't lie, it's trying, it's tough, but you can do it. And there's a reason why. This is just one example of many. I'm saying this to make the point that it requires our obedience and preparation. It's like, if we say that we believe God, that we're going to get married, and we don't actually do anything. The Apostle James tells us, or if we don't uh, align our actions to what we say we believe, the Apostle James tells us that the faith we have is incomplete. He says that Abraham's faith, right, his confession with his mouth, aligned with what he actually did to pursue what God showed him, and that made his faith complete. That's James chapter 2 verse 22. It made his faith complete, and a lot of times we're operating in incomplete faith, professing with our mouth, but our hearts are far away from God. We have to honor God with our body. Another thing in preparation for marriage is that finances need to be on point. Now, you don't have to be rich, right? I'm not a rich man by any means, right? Financially, I will be. But at this point in time, we are establishing ourselves to be wealthy people, and we
Hmm.
have to manage our money correctly. Now, money management is a muscle that needs to be built for some people. Not everybody had the same experiences. Not everybody was exposed to money or how to manage their money well. That's one thing that you have to learn about. You have to seek wise counsel on that. Because finances will tear a relationship up. It really will. Especially if there's one person who's making significantly more than the other, they may feel more attached, or they may feel like they are, contributing a little bit more, and it's just a doorway for pride to enter in and then begin to tear up the marriage. So honoring God with your body, honoring God with your finances, and then also honoring your spouse or your potential spouse with your vulnerability. I think that those are three things.
Mm.
Now we could literally talk. This is an entire podcast by itself. But I think that having healthy communication requires a deeper level of vulnerability. Every wife needs a husband in which they can feel safe around, physically safe and emotionally safe, right? So fellas, you might have to shut your mouth sometimes, right? Like you might need to just listen. Like I know that we are the ones who like to fix everything. We're the fixers. We're the we're the hunter and gatherers, right? But sometimes you just need to listen. And then for my sisters, uh, guys, we're emotional beings as well. As much as we like to kind of negate that thing, but we really need a safe place to fall apart emotionally. We we get the stigma of be a man about it, like toughen up and all of that type of stuff. And when we are tough, right, but we have our moments of weakness, we have our moments where we need to fall apart, and it needs to be a safe place in which we can fall apart. We need to be able to come to you guys and talk about our day as well, and feel comfortable, you know what I mean, and like feel like that it's an actual safe place. So in your preparation for marriage, I want you to practice these things. I want you to go to your potential husband or your potential wife and literally just listen, like how was your day, tell me everything about your day. Tell me the ups and the downs, not just don't give me like the G-rated version. I need rated R. I need everything. And that practice is going to help you to be more vulnerable, because
Mhm.
when you get into the relationship, when you get into the marriage, it's just y'all. Especially if you don't have any children. Like my wife and I don't have any kids, and we don't have any kids yet. Um, and it's just us. You know what I'm saying? Like it's gonna be just y'all. It's y'all against everybody else. One more thing that I have to add. This just dropped on me. When you have um tough conversations, right? Know that you may not always see eye to eye, but it's not you against her, or it's not her against him. It's you two versus the problem. And you guys
Yes.
got to learn how to fight together, because when you become one, you're literally like, imagine it as literally being one body, right? Bible
Mhm.
says that two became one, right? Two became one. So like you're not operating as yourself anymore. So it's you two versus the problem. Manage your money right, honor the Lord with your body, and whatever else he's telling you to do as pertains to obedience, because that is a testament to what your faith really is, whether it's complete or incomplete. Faith is not necessarily always what you do, but it's what you don't do. So if God tells you that you're the head and not the tail, and that you're the lender, not the borrower, stop spending your money on stuff that you can't afford. It's the same way if he tells you, if you're a husband and you're a wife, act like you're a wife. Like treat your spouse as if they are who God says that they are. I know that was a mouthful, but we can
It's
literally
good stuff though.
I'll
And I
try.
actually I want to
Sure.
dissect it a little bit because I feel like you spoke into a lot of things. So when it comes
Yeah.
to, abstinence, and abstinence
Yeah.
isn't just like, oh, because God said so.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that you can protect yourself from by
Absolutely.
choosing to be abstinent.
Absolutely.
Number one is STDs.
Number
Number
one.
two, emotional attachment
Yes.
to someone, because, and I'm like honest about my stuff, like
Hmm.
I'm not afraid to share, but like that part of it is more difficult for women than it is for men. I'm saying in general because
Hmm.
some guys are different,
Absolutely.
but that makes it a lot tougher, because you've given a piece of yourself to someone that, and it
Right.
didn't work out,
Yeah.
right? So like that part of it is very difficult to navigate. But if
Absolutely.
you haven't put yourself in that position in a physical way, you're, don't get me wrong, I mean, you're still, if it doesn't work out, you're still going to be disappointed,
Yeah.
but you might not be as attached
Yeah, I mean,
to
you
that
surely won't.
person.
You surely won't, because when you have sex with somebody, it is not only just a physical thing, right? Like God created our anatomy. He knows that, sex feels good, right? But like I said in the scriptures, that two becomes one flesh, right? It's not obviously it doesn't obviously mean that y'all gonna be like walking inside of each other's body. You're obviously not literally one person. It's referring to the spiritual connection that you're becoming one.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives the indication that there is a lot more than what physically goes on. And then from a biological level, there are chemicals and hormones released called oxytocin. And oxytocin is literally a bonding hormone. It's the same as like when a mother bonds with a newborn child when they are, nursing the child. Same exact chemical is released when two people have intercourse, sexual intercourse with each other. So regardless if the guys you want to recognize it or not, you want to think you tough and you hard, you're not. Because
No.
biologically, your body releases that. And you may not want to admit it, but deep down inside, I mean, I know the truth. You know what I'm saying? Like I've been there. I know what it's like. And here's one thing too. I'll share this testimony. We talk about it, my wife and I. My wife, um, was a virgin. And she abstained her entire life. Or yeah, abstinent. She abstained her entire life. Um, not having sexual intercourse until she got married. Like she prepared herself, and
Wow.
that was actually one of the first things that I knew about her. I haven't always loved the Lord. I said that before. First thing I knew about her, I asked one of my friends at the time. I was like, "Yo, who is that?" I saw her, and he was like, "Oh, that's Juanita. She not with it." So that gives you an indication. That gives you
She
an
set the
indication.
standard.
Yeah, like before I even talked to her, I knew what she was going to expect. I knew the standard that she was living her life by, and truthfully, I didn't want to interfere or impede on that. But then once we started to interact with each other, I started to see myself the way that she saw herself as a child of God. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm sorry. We about to that's a whole heat. Y'all gotta just tune into Love Does Cost a Thing, man. In February is going down, man. Just tune in.
Yes, yes, I definitely love that. And I like to talk about that because it's something sometimes people don't want to say, but it's
Mm-hmm.
really plaguing our communities. If
Absolutely.
you look at the age where, kids are getting into relationships
Oh yeah,
now and how different it is, it's like someone has to say something.
absolutely.
And I also want to dive in just a little bit about the finances. So, like,
Sure.
I am big on
As you
finances,
should be.
money
As
management,
you should be.
passive income.
Mm-hmm. As you should
Like,
be.
yes, all of those things. And the number one reason for divorce is not adultery, or
Nope.
it's not
Nope.
because the sex wasn't good.
Nope.
It's the money.
It's the money or the lack thereof or the fidelity of the money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that it's important to understand like you have to get your money right even as a single. I'm
Absolutely.
not saying that you'll be perfect,
Nope.
but like take those steps to better yourself financially. And I talk about it all the time on a lot of my podcast
Yeah.
episodes. I talk about it on my social media platforms. I give away free information. Like I have no problem with sharing, but I just want people to be aware of that. And then another thing is time freedom. So, like, let's say that money is so tight, you guys aren't spending time together, or
Yep.
one person is constantly working and the other's at home with the kids. So they feel like their relationship is being strained. That also can lead to someone stepping outside of the marriage.
Absolutely.
So, you got to have your money right because you don't want to give the devil a foothold in your
Yep.
marriage because he clearly has one in a lot of people's marriages.
Yep. 40 to 50% in America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is so insane.
Yeah.
I did want to ask a little bit about the best advice you received
Mm-hmm.
on relationships. What was some of the best advice?
Got you. So this is something that I had gotten when I was 16, but I've applied it to my life. And I think that it's most pertinent in relationships because if you're being vulnerable with this person, they're gonna see you at your highest highs and your lowest lows. Um, I made a post about it. Go watch it on my YouTube. It's called "My Baseball Team Got Into a Fight." So
Mm,
my coach, he sat us down and he told us, he said, never let your emotions overrule your better judgment. And I mean, that means exactly what it says, man. Like your emotions, I say it all the time, your feelings are temporary. As soon as the wind blows, you'll feel something else. You'll feel a different way about the situation, but you got to understand that this person is your husband, man. Like this person is your wife. This is your ministry. This is what you've been called to. This was ordained by the God of the universe before the annals of time. Like before you knew you, he knew you, he called you, he loved you, and he called you a husband, he called you a wife. So this is much bigger than what you feel for this mere moment. It's soon going to be a memory, and then you're going to feel something else. So you got to take a moment, obviously, to gather yourself when you feel those anxiety, when you feel those moments of sadness or even anger. whatever it may be, take a moment to gather yourself until you can effectively communicate. In my house, we don't call arguments, we call them tough conversations. We do not yell at each
Mhm.
other. We speak respectfully, and if we need a moment to gather ourselves before we talk, then we'll have a moment. Sometimes the moments are a little bit longer than others, but that's just the truth of the matter. Because when you speak out of emotions, when you speak out of your emotion, oftentimes it's harder to hear. The Bible says in Proverbs, I believe it's chapter 15, it says, a soft answer turns away wrath. So it's
Mhm.
literally not what you say, but it's how you say it. It's how you say it. We've heard that phrase coined in society, but God said it first. So knowing that your emotions can, they can't overrule your better judgment, and if they do, you have to be willing to ask for forgiveness, and you have to be willing to give that other, your spouse, the opportunity to forgive you.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
I love that you shared that because in order to have a healthy relationship, like you have to talk through
yeah,
the tough conversations
absolutely.
because it's not always going to be peachy creamy. Like, and I know you and your wife, y'all just like have come to your first anniversary
Yes,
recently, which congratulations because I
thank
heard the
you.
first year is like the worst.
Yeah, you know what's so funny though? You know what's so funny? I heard that too, but it wasn't bad. Like, it wasn't bad at all. Like, I think it was actually pretty good. Like, considering a whole lot of things that you'll have to tune in to the Love Does Cost a Thing show for. Like, I'll tell you like this: we we got married and bought a house within like 3 months of each other.
Oh
And for the
wow.
first 12 months of our marriage, we shared our house a couple of different times.
Mm.
You got to tune into the show for the rest of
Wow.
it, but like but I mean, once you in there, you in there, man. You got to stick it out, and you know what? Like, it was a great first year. Like, I really can't complain about it. Like, I really can't complain. It was a great first year.
That is awesome. And I'm glad that you guys, had a lot of success within that first year
Yeah.
and that was your foundation and your building blocks. So, I know you've already told us that we can connect with you for YouTube
Mhm.
for the series Love Does Cost a Thing, which I'll be tuning into, and I will link his YouTube channel in the show notes. They can also find you at jordangreenellis.com where you have all your information and unashamed apparel. All that is on there. And then if you go to Instagram or Facebook, they can connect with you at J Green Ellis Live. Is all that information correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
Yes. Well, Jordan, I have really enjoyed having you on the show. I feel like for myself, like I cried. If I cried, like just interviewing someone,
Wow, I'm
I
so
know
honored.
that other people who, weren't interviewing and they're just listening, I know they had to cry.
Wow, wow,
So
that's
I
so
felt
awesome.
encouraged myself, listening to this, this interview because I feel like you have a lot of wisdom within you
Amen.
in this area, and I think that it's going to continue to help and bless other people.
Praise God, man. I so appreciate that, man. Especially coming from you, the guru. You
Oh
you
gosh.
getting it done. You getting it done over there. And like I said, I appreciate it, and I'm honored for this opportunity.
Yes, yes. So, guys, make sure you are listening all the way through and go connect with him on his different platforms because I believe he's doing a great work and it's going to blow up. And I don't want you guys to miss out.